The sound of a
Welcome. So
Japanese
glad you could
pole
make it.
saw
Thanks, we're
biting into
excited to
white
be
oak
here.
is a
Come on in.
rhythmic
Let's get you
whisper
settled.
that drowns out the rest of the world. Dante Cross stood at his primary workbench in the center of his San Francisco warehouse. His entire focus narrowed to the pencil line marking a half-blind dovetail joint. The heavy fog of the city pressed against the frosted skylights above, turning the morning sun into a soft gray wash. It was 4 in the morning. The concrete floor was cold beneath his steel-toed boots. His gray t-shirt clung to his back from 3 hours of planing rough lumber. At 30 years old, Dante had learned that wood was the only thing in his life that made perfect sense. Angles didn't lie. Measurements didn't betray. The friction of wood fibers was predictable, honest, pure. People were a different story entirely. His phone vibrated on the workbench. The screen lit up with a single name, Volkov. Dante set the saw down carefully on the cork-lined tray. He wiped sawdust from his palms before picking up the phone. His voice dropped an octave when he answered. The warmth left his tone completely. "Talk to me." "Boss, the Portland shipment cleared customs an hour ago." Kaz Volkov's voice was crisp and professional. "The lumber's clean. The hardware underneath needs your final approval for distribution." Dante walked to the eastern wall of the warehouse where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sleeping city. The fog was thick enough to erase the neighboring buildings. He could have been floating in empty space. "How much hardware are we moving?" 40 units. Street value puts it at 200,000. Dante closed his eyes. This was the part of his life that paid for the warehouse, the tools, the silence. The Cross Syndicate had been his inheritance. His father had built an empire on fear and violence. Dante had inherited the throne at 22, when a car bomb meant for his father had killed both his parents instead. 8 years of ruling. 8 years of balancing brutality with strategy. 8 years of pretending the blood on his hands didn't stain the same fingers that shaped dovetail joints. "Approve it," Dante said quietly, "but tell the street captains I want clean drops. No civilians caught in the radius. No mistakes." "Understood, boss." Dante ended the call. He stood at the window for a long moment, his reflection barely visible in the glass. A tall frame, broad shoulders, dark hair that fell slightly too long over his forehead. His hands were calloused from woodworking, but scarred from darker work. The contrast lived inside him, like two men trapped in one body. The carpenter and the king. He turned back to his workbench. The dovetail joint waited for him. This was real. This was who he wanted to be. Everything else was just survival. The heavy industrial buzzer mounted above the freight elevator shattered the quiet. Dante stopped mid-reach for his saw. His jaw tightened. He wasn't expecting a lumber delivery. He certainly wasn't expecting a client. The few people who knew about his workshop knew better than to arrive unannounced. The buzzer sounded again, a long, persistent drone that suggested whoever stood outside the heavy steel doors had zero intention of leaving. Dante crossed the concrete floor. His boots echoed in the vast empty space. He reached the iron handle, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. The visual discrepancy of what stood on his concrete porch temporarily short-circuited his brain. 2 women, 2 bright-colored suitcases, 2 desperate smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. The woman in front was striking in a way that made his chest feel tight. She was maybe 38, with dark hair pulled into a loose knot at the base of her neck. She wore a plain white scoop-neck t-shirt and blue jeans. Her posture was straight despite obvious exhaustion. Her eyes were the color of dark honey, and they held his gaze without flinching. Dante recognized her immediately. 2 years ago, he had walked into the Morgana Gallery on a reconnaissance mission. The Cross Syndicate had been looking for a legitimate front to launder money through art sales. Dante had posed as a potential buyer interested in Renaissance pieces. Isolde Morgana herself had given him a private tour of her collection. She had moved through that gallery like she was walking through a cathedral. Every painting had a story. Every sculpture had a soul. She spoke about art with the kind of passion that Dante only felt when his hands touched raw wood. He had left the gallery that night and called off the entire operation. He told Kaz Volkov to find a different front. He couldn't bring himself to corrupt something that beautiful. And now she stood on his doorstep. "I'm sorry to bother you this early," Isolde said. Her voice had a slight tremor underneath the forced politeness. "My name is Isolde Morgana. This is my sister Aurelia. We're in a difficult situation and we desperately need help." Dante's gaze moved to the younger woman standing beside Isolde. Aurelia was maybe 32, with sharper features and eyes that moved constantly cataloging everything. She wore an identical white t-shirt and denim shorts. Her knuckles were white on the handle of a black suitcase. Isolde gripped a bright pink hardshell suitcase. The visual of that cheerful pink luggage, against the industrial gray corridor was almost absurd. "What kind of situation?" Dante asked. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Isolde took a half step forward. The plastic wheels of her pink suitcase clicked against the concrete threshold. "We were locked out of our home last night. The landlord changed the locks at midnight. He claims there's a structural emergency with the building. We can't get to our apartment. We can't get to the gallery and inventory. We grabbed what we could before his security forced us out." The cold weight of understanding dropped into Dante's stomach. Landlord disputes in San Francisco were common, but midnight lockouts with private security were not standard procedure. That was the work of someone who knew how to weaponize bureaucracy. "Who's your landlord?" "Gregor Ashwood. He owns the brick building on—" "I know who he is," Dante interrupted. "Gregor Ashwood." The name tasted bitter. Dante knew the man by reputation. Ashwood was connected to the Ravenna Syndicate, a rival organization that had been encroaching on Cross territory for the past 18 months. The Ravennas operated differently than the Cross family. They preferred legal corruption over street violence, real estate fraud, zoning manipulation, bureaucratic warfare. If Gregor Ashwood was targeting Isolde Morgana, there was a reason beyond simple rent disputes. Dante looked past the two women into the corridor beyond. The wind was picking up, rattling the loose corrugated metal siding. A sudden sheet of rain lashed against the narrow hallway windows. The temperature was dropping fast. Both women were shivering. Dante didn't think. He simply stepped back and reached out to grab the handle of Isolde's pink suitcase from her hand. He pulled it inside. "Get in," he said, "before you freeze." Isolde and Aurelia hurried out of the drafty corridor. Dante pushed the heavy steel door shut behind them and threw the deadbolt. The sound echoed through the warehouse like a final punctuation mark. Isolde stood near the entrance, looking around the massive space. Her eyes moved from the industrial heaters mounted on the ceiling to the rows of curing timber stacked against the walls. She took in the heavy machinery, the rolling tool chests, the elevated platform in the back corner, where Dante kept a mattress and a small kitchen setup. This wasn't a home. It was a workshop that someone happened to sleep in. Dust motes danced in the gray morning light, filtering through the skylights. The smell of sawdust and machine oil hung thick in the air. "I know this is an imposition," Isolde said quietly. She wrapped her arms around her chest. "We were going to walk to the hotel on 4th Street, but the storm hit, and she looked down at her canvas shoes. They were already soaked through. "You're not walking to a hotel in a squall," Dante said. He moved to the thermostat on the western wall and pushed the dial up 5 degrees. The massive overhead heaters kicked on with a low roar. Warmth began to spread through the cold space. "The problem is this is a single open room," Dante continued, gesturing to the warehouse. "There are no walls, no guest bedroom." "We don't care," Aurelia said quickly. She dropped her black suitcase on the floor with a solid thunk. "Honestly, just a dry floor is fine. We won't be any trouble." Dante looked at the two of them. Isolde's bright pink suitcase sat on his concrete floor like it had been dropped into the wrong universe. The clean plastic shell caught the gray light. A thin ribbon of wet grit from the wheels cut through the sawdust near his boots. The contrast hit him hard enough that he had to turn toward the lumber rack before either woman could see the expression on his face. These women didn't belong in his world. But he couldn't send them back out into the storm. And if Gregor Ashwood was behind their lockout, sending them to a hotel would only delay the inevitable. "I can fix the wall situation," Dante said. He didn't wait for them to argue. He walked to the eastern wall where he stored excess materials. He grabbed 4 lengths of 8-foot cedar 2x4s. The wood was smooth under his palms, already planed and ready for use. He carried them to the far corner of the warehouse near the large industrial windows. He grabbed his cordless impact driver and a box of 3-inch construction screws from his tool chest. The familiar weight of the tools in his hands steadied something inside him. Isolde and Aurelia watched in silence as he worked. Dante didn't measure with a tape. He aligned the edges flush with the concrete pillars and drove the screws in with practiced precision. The impact driver sang its high-pitched mechanical song. 8 minutes later, he had built a rigid freestanding frame anchored to the structural supports of the warehouse. He walked to a stack of heavy, unbleached canvas drop cloths he used for finishing work. The fabric was thick and durable, meant to protect fine furniture from dust. He draped the canvas over the cedar frame, pulling it taut and securing it with a pneumatic staple gun. The sharp thwack, thwack, thwack of the staples echoed over the sound of rain hammering against the skylights. When Dante stepped back, he had created a private 10x10 enclosed space in the corner of the warehouse. The canvas walls blocked the sight line completely, while still allowing air to flow. It wasn't soundproof, but it offered genuine privacy. He dragged a spare futon mattress from his storage area and pushed it behind the canvas partition. He added 2 folded blankets and a small LED lantern. Then he walked back to where Isolde and Aurelia stood near their suitcases. "It's not soundproof," Dante said, pointing to the canvas partition, "but it blocks the sight line completely. You have privacy. The bathroom is in the back left corner. There's a shower. Hot water takes about 2 minutes to kick in." He paused, his gaze moving between the two women. "Don't touch the table saw. Don't plug anything into the orange outlets. They're wired for 220 voltage, and they will fry your phone chargers." Isolde looked at the makeshift room, then back at him. The tight, stressed lines around her mouth softened slightly. Her honey-colored eyes held an emotion that Dante couldn't quite name, gratitude mixed with something deeper. "Thank you," she said softly. "Don't thank me yet," Dante replied, turning back toward his workbench. "I make coffee at 5 in the morning, and the machinery is loud." He heard the soft rustle of the canvas curtain as the two women disappeared into the partition. Then silence settled over the warehouse again, broken only by the rain and the low hum of the heaters. Dante stood at his workbench, staring down at the unfinished dovetail joint. His hands were still covered in fine sawdust. His mind was racing. Gregor Ashwood, the Morgana Gallery, a midnight lockout with fabricated structural claims. This wasn't random, this was targeted. And Dante needed to know why. Tuesday morning arrived gray and wet. The rain had never stopped. It hammered the skylights in a relentless sheet that turned the warehouse into an echo chamber of white noise. Dante stood at the espresso machine he had rebuilt himself, pulling a shot of dark roast. The mechanical hum of the pump filled the space. He had been awake since 4, working on the dining table commission that was due in 2 weeks. The walnut slab was finally planed smooth, ready for the joinery phase. He heard the soft slide of the canvas curtain pulling back. Isolde emerged from the partition. She wore a thick gray sweater over her jeans. Her dark hair was pulled up into a messy knot secured with a pencil. She looked exhausted. The polished gallery owner's sophistication was gone, replaced by something more vulnerable and real. Dante kept his face perfectly neutral, even as his chest tightened. "Coffee?" he asked, holding up a clean ceramic mug. "Please," Isolde said. She walked over to the kitchen island and sat down on one of the wooden stools Dante had turned on the lathe last month. She watched his hands as he tamped the grounds and locked the portafilter into the machine. "Aurelia is still sleeping," Isolde said quietly. "She was up half the night panicking about her credit cards. The business accounts are frozen because they're linked to the gallery's physical address. Gregor claimed a lien on the premises." Dante pushed the mug across the counter toward her. "Drink." Isolde wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, letting the heat seep into her fingers. She took a sip and closed her eyes briefly. "I feel like a failure," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 7 years of building that client list, curating those collections, and a man with a piece of paper just locks the door, and it's all gone. "He claimed a structural hazard," Dante said, leaning against the counter, his arms crossed over his chest. "What exactly did the notice say?" Isolde pulled her phone from her sweater pocket. She scrolled through her emails and turned the screen toward him. Dante read the official eviction notice. The language was dense and bureaucratic, but the core claim was clear. The main load-bearing timber on the gallery's second floor was showing catastrophic stress fracturing. The city required immediate evacuation until contractors could brace the structure. Failure to comply would result in property seizure. "He said it was an immediate life safety issue," Isolde continued. "He had photos of this massive crack running down the timber beam in the ceiling. It looked terrifying." Dante studied the attached photo on her phone. The image showed a wide vertical crack splitting through what appeared to be a large wooden beam above the gallery's reception area. His eyes narrowed. "I spent 2 weeks installing display pedestals in a gallery downtown about 18 months ago," Dante said slowly. He didn't mention that the gallery had been a potential target for syndicate money laundering. "The building was similar vintage to yours, 1920s brick and timber construction. Do you know when your building was retrofitted?" Isolde blinked. "I think Gregor mentioned something about earthquake upgrades in the late 90s. "Why?" "Because buildings that old don't use solid timber for load-bearing beams anymore," Dante said. "Not after the Loma Prieta quake. The retrofits replaced the original timber with steel I-beams. They box the steel in decorative wood to maintain the historic aesthetic." He zoomed in on the photo of the cracked beam. "That crack you're seeing, it's in the cosmetic shell. The wood you see isn't load-bearing. It's hollow boxing around a steel core." Isolde stared at him. Her lips parted slightly. Are you saying the structural emergency is fake? I'm saying wood doesn't fracture like that overnight, Dante replied. Old-growth Douglas fir deflects under stress. It bends over decades. It doesn't just split down the center unless there's been a seismic event or catastrophic water damage. And if there had been, either the entire block would know about it. He set her phone down on the counter between them. Gregor Ashwood is using a fabricated emergency to bypass the 90-day eviction notice required for commercial leases in San Francisco. That makes this an illegal lockout. Isolde's eyes were sharp now, focused with sudden intensity. Can we prove that? We can, Dante said, but we need to move carefully. He didn't tell her the rest of what he was thinking, that Gregor Ashwood wouldn't risk an illegal lockout unless he was searching for something specific in that gallery, that the Ravenna Syndicate didn't waste resources on petty real estate schemes, that Isolde Morgana's beautiful art collection was hiding something valuable enough to justify this kind of exposure. Dante's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A text message from Kaz Volkov. Background check complete on Ashwood. You need to see this. Sending encrypted file. Dante pocketed the phone. He looked up and found Isolde watching him with those honey-colored eyes. You're not just a woodworker, are you? She asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. Dante could have lied. He was good at lying. 8 years of running a criminal empire had taught him how to wear masks. But something about the way she looked at him made the lies stick in his throat. I run a business, he said carefully. Import-export. Mostly legitimate. The woodworking is what I do when I want to remember who I actually am. It was the closest he'd come to the truth in years. Isolde nodded slowly. She didn't press for details. Instead, she looked down at the coffee mug in her hands. The easel you fixed yesterday, she said. That brass pin you machined. That level of precision. That's not just a hobby, is it? No, Dante admitted. It's not. Sitting on the counter next to Isolde's coffee mug was the mahogany presentation easel she had been carrying when she arrived. The main brass locking hinge had been completely sheared in half, likely during the frantic packing as Gregor's security forced them out. Dante had noticed it yesterday. He hadn't asked about it. He hadn't offered sympathetic speeches. He had simply picked up the broken pieces and carried them to his metalworking bench. The repair had taken less than 10 minutes. He had measured the fractured brass hinge with digital calipers, chucked a solid rod of naval brass into the metal lathe, and turned a new pin with microscopic precision. He had machined a locking groove, chamfered the edges, and polished the brass until it gleamed like gold. When he slotted the two pieces of the easel back together and inserted the new pin, it seated with a quiet, satisfying click. The easel stood perfectly rigid, stronger than it had been before it broke. He had set it in front of Isolde without a word. She had stared at the repaired wood for a long time. When she finally looked up at him, the panic in her eyes had been replaced by something that looked like overwhelming relief. Now sitting across from him in the gray morning light, she touched the brass pin gently. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. I noticed it was broken, Dante said. His fingers locked around the edge of the counter. Sawdust pressed into his palm. He kept his eyes on the brass pin instead of her mouth. I fixed what's broken. The metal lathe was still ticking softly as it cooled behind him. The extra beat of silence gave him just enough control to finish evenly. That's what I do. By Thursday afternoon, a routine had settled over the warehouse. It was fragile and temporary, but it existed. Aurelia spent her mornings at the small table by the eastern windows, aggressively calling lawyers and city clerks. Her voice carried across the warehouse as she argued with bureaucrats who gave her the same scripted responses over and over. Dante could hear the frustration building in her tone. Isolde paced the perimeter of the warehouse with her phone pressed to her ear. She spent hours placating furious artists whose work was locked inside the gallery. Dante listened to her voice shift from apologetic to firm to nearly breaking. She skipped lunch every day unless he silently placed a plate of food on the table near her. He noticed things, small details that he filed away without meaning to. The way Isolde rubbed her left shoulder when the stress got too high. The way she closed her eyes and took 3 deep breaths before making difficult phone calls. The way she stood at the window sometimes and just stared out at the phone like she was trying to find answers in the gray. Dante stayed at his workbench, working on the walnut dining table commission. But his attention was split. Half of his mind tracked measurements and grain patterns. The other half tracked the rhythm of Isolde's footsteps across the concrete floor. He had called Kaz Volkov on Tuesday night after the women had gone to sleep. The conversation had been brief and quiet. I need everything on Gregor Ashwood, Dante had said. Financial records, property holdings, known associates. And I need to know if he's working for Ravenna. Already on it, boss, Kaz had replied. But there's something else you should know. The Morgana Gallery showed up in our old reconnaissance files from 2 years ago. Dante had gone very still. Explain. You flagged it as a potential front for art-based laundering, high-value Italian Renaissance pieces moving through auction houses. Clean provenance on paper, but the acquisition timelines didn't add up. You called off the investigation and told me to bury the file. I remember. Boss, one of the pieces in that gallery is flagged in Interpol's stolen art database. The Crimson Madonna, a 15th century oil painting. It was stolen from a private collector in Florence 8 years ago during a home invasion. 3 people died in that theft. The painting vanished into the black market. Dante's hand had tightened around the phone. Who was the collector? There had been a pause on the other end of the line. Then Kaz's voice had come back quieter than before. Your grandmother, boss, Isabella Cross. The world had tilted sideways. 8 years ago, Dante had been 22 years old and newly crowned as the head of the Cross Syndicate after his parents' death. His uncle Lucien Cross had challenged his authority. There had been a violent internal coup. Loyalties had fractured. Blood had been spilled. In the chaos, someone had broken into his grandmother's villa in Florence. 3 staff members had been killed. Isabella's art collection had been ransacked. The Crimson Madonna, her most prized possession, had been stolen. Isabella Cross had died 7 years ago, 6 months after the theft. Some said the loss had broken her heart. Dante had always suspected Lucien was behind the theft. His uncle had disappeared after the coup failed, taking a third of the syndicate's resources with him. Intelligence suggested Lucien had aligned himself with the Ravenna family, and now that painting was sitting in Isolde Morgana's gallery. Dante had ended the call with Kaz and sat in the darkness of the warehouse for hours staring at the canvas partition where Isolde and Aurelia slept. She didn't know. There was no way she could know. Isolde Morgana ran a legitimate gallery. She bought pieces through legal auctions. If the Crimson Madonna had come to her with clean provenance paperwork, she would have had no reason to suspect its origin. But Gregor Ashwood knew, and Lucien Cross knew. The lockout wasn't about rent, it was about recovering the painting. And if Dante exposed the connection, he would expose himself. Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock, the fragile piece shattered. Dante was using a hand plane to smooth the edge of the walnut slab when he heard a sharp gasp from the kitchen area. He looked up. Isolde was staring at her laptop screen. Her face had gone completely white. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the concrete floor. Aurelia jumped up from her chair. Isolde, what is it? Dante set the hand plane down and crossed the warehouse in long, fast strides. It's a certified digital notice, Isolde said. Her voice was hollow, empty. She wasn't looking at her sister. She was just staring at the screen like it had delivered a death sentence. Gregor filed an abandonment claim. Because we haven't cured the safety defect, which we can't do, because we're locked out. He's legally seizing the entire inventory of the gallery to cover the cost of his emergency structural repairs. Her hands started to shake. The tremor moved from her fingers up to her shoulders. He's taking the art. All of it. Tomorrow morning. Aurelia let out a choked sound. She buried her face in her hands. Isolde stood up from the counter. She backed away slowly, her breathing turning shallow and fast. She looked incredibly small, crushed under the weight of a bureaucratic machine she couldn't fight. Dante didn't think. He moved on pure instinct. He stepped directly into her path before she could retreat into the canvas partition. He didn't wrap his arms around her. He didn't pull her into his chest. That would have been too much, too fast, too intimate for what they were to each other. Instead, he reached out and placed both of his hands firmly on her shoulders. The moment his palms made contact, he applied steady downward pressure. Not rough, not controlling, just solid and grounding, like he was anchoring her to the floor when everything else was spinning out of control. Isolde, Dante said. His voice dropped an octave, completely calm, absolutely certain. Stop. She froze. The shaking hitched, fighting against the weight of his hands. He's taking my life, she whispered. Her eyes were wide and terrified as they looked up at him. 7 years of work, gone. No, Dante said flatly. He's sending a piece of paper. Paper is just a tool. We break the tool. The sudden stillness between them was heavy. Dante could feel the transfer happening. The frantic chaos in her eyes slowly locked onto the steady, unmoving reality of his presence. He didn't let go until he felt the tremor leave her muscles completely. Until she took a deep, shaky breath and her shoulders dropped. Only then did he slide his hands back and slip them into the pockets of his jeans. He had to force himself not to linger, not to let his palms memorize the shape of her shoulders under that gray sweater. "What do we do?" Isolde asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "We look at the law," Dante said. He pulled his phone out and placed it face down on the counter. No notifications, no interruptions. She had his complete attention. "Aurelia, pull up the city building code for emergency commercial evictions. Isolde, forward me the exact wording of Gregor's structural hazard claim. We're going to find the cracks in his story." Aurelia moved to her laptop with renewed focus. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Isolde pulled out her phone with shaking hands and forwarded the documents to Dante's email. For the next 3 hours, the warehouse became a war room. They spread papers across the kitchen island. They highlighted contradictions in the eviction notice. They documented timelines and photographed evidence. And Dante made a phone call. "Kaz," he said quietly, stepping away from the women so they couldn't hear. "I need a favor, and I need it to stay off the books." "Name it, boss." "I need you to confirm something about the Ravenna Syndicate, specifically about an art recovery operation targeting the Morgana Gallery. And I need you to tell me if Lucienne Cross is involved." There was a long pause. "Boss, if Lucienne is moving on your grandmother's painting, this isn't just business. This is personal. You go after him, the Ravennas will respond. This could start a war." "I know," Dante said. His gaze moved across the warehouse to where Isolde sat at the counter, her face illuminated by the laptop screen. "But I'm not letting them take what's hers." "Understood," Kaz said. "I'll have intel by morning." Dante ended the call. When he turned back to the kitchen island, he found Isolde watching him. Those honey-colored eyes were sharp and assessing. "Who were you talking to?" she asked. "Someone who can help," Dante said. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Isolde held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she nodded and turned back to her laptop. The rain continued to fall. The warehouse grew darker as evening settled in. But inside, under the gray light of the overhead lamps, 3 people worked with quiet determination. Tomorrow, Gregor Ashwood planned to seize everything Isolde had built. But Dante Cross had other plans. And when a king decided to move, the board changed completely. Friday morning arrived cold and sharp. The storm had finally passed, leaving the city washed clean under a pale blue sky. Dante stood at the warehouse windows watching the sunrise paint the fog-covered rooftops in shades of gold and pink. He hadn't slept. The walnut dining table sat finished on his workbench, the joinery completed in the quiet hours before dawn. His hands still smelled of wood oil and linseed, but his mind had been somewhere else entirely. The Crimson Madonna, his grandmother's painting, 8 years of searching, and it had been sitting in Isolde Morgana's gallery the entire time. Behind him, he heard the soft sounds of the warehouse waking up, the coffee machine hissing to life, Aurelia's laptop chiming with new emails, Isolde's footsteps crossing the concrete floor. Dante's phone buzzed. A text from Kaz Volkov. Intel confirmed. Gregor Ashwood is Ravenna muscle. Lucienne Cross is directing the operation from Prague. The painting is the primary target. Secondary objective, discredit you by linking you to the gallery theft. This is a trap, boss. Dante deleted the message and pocketed the phone. He turned from the window to find Isolde standing at the kitchen island, already dressed in fresh clothes. She wore dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked tired but determined. "We're going to the gallery this morning," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of intent. Dante nodded. "We are. And you're going to prove the structural emergency is fake." "Yes?" Isolde's honey-colored eyes held his gaze. "And then what Gregor backs down, he lets us walk back into the building and pretend nothing happened." "No," Dante said quietly. "Then we make him understand that he made a mistake targeting you." The weight of that promise hung in the air between them. At 10 o'clock, they stood outside the heavy glass doors of the Morgana Gallery. The building was a beautiful example of 1920s architecture, red brick with tall arched windows. A hand-painted sign above the entrance read, "Morgana Gallery, fine art since 2018, in elegant gold lettering." Gregor Ashwood stood inside the lobby with 2 men in expensive suits directing a moving crew carrying empty cardboard crates. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his silver hair slicked back. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and Italian leather shoes. He looked like money, old money that had learned how to hide blood under manicured fingernails. Isolde pushed the door open. The antique bell above the entrance chimed loudly. Gregor turned around. His face settled into an expression of smug irritation. "Miss Morgana, you are trespassing. The premises are under emergency seal by order of the city building inspector." "Call off the movers, Gregor," Isolde said. Her voice didn't shake. She stood tall, her shoulders squared. The inventory seizure is illegal and you know it. Dante stood exactly one half step behind her and to the right, present, invisible, but letting her hold the floor. This was her fight. He was just here to provide the evidence. The inventory is being seized to cover the structural repairs you failed to address, Gregor said smoothly. He gestured to a massive splintered crack running through the overhead wooden beam above the reception desk. As you can see, the building is unsafe. My lawyers have already filed the paperwork. The seizure is completely legal. Dante didn't say a word. He simply unzipped the canvas tool bag he was carrying. He pulled out a heavy steel pry bar and a high-lumen inspection flashlight. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Gregor snapped as Dante walked past him. Dante ignored him. He dragged a wooden stepping stool over to the reception desk and stepped up. He clicked the flashlight on. The harsh white beam illuminated the massive crack in the decorative beam. Without asking permission, Dante jammed the flat edge of the pry bar directly into the crack. He wrenched his wrist sideways with controlled force. With a loud crack, a 3-foot section of the wooden beam snapped off cleanly. It clattered to the polished floor in a shower of splinters and dust. The two lawyers yelled in shock. Gregor stepped forward, his face flushing red with rage. "That is destruction of property. I'm calling the police right now." "Call them," Dante said calmly. He stepped down from the stool and pointed the flashlight up into the gaping hole he had just created in the ceiling. The bright LED beam reflected off solid, unyielding, industrial gray steel. "It's a steel I-beam," Dante said. His voice carried clearly across the now silent gallery. He looked directly at the two lawyers. "The wood is a cosmetic shell, decorative boxing installed during the 1998 seismic retrofit. It carries zero structural load. There is no failure. There is no emergency." He lowered the flashlight and turned to face Gregor. "You executed an emergency eviction and locked out a commercial tenant based on fabricated evidence. In the state of California, that's fraud. And if you seize this inventory under false pretenses, it becomes grand larceny." The silence in the gallery was absolute. The moving crew had stopped working. The lawyers were staring up at the exposed steel beam with expressions that shifted from confusion to dawning horror. Gregor's smugness had completely vanished. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he said quietly. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Dante took a single step closer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is whether you know who you're threatening." For a brief moment, recognition flickered in Gregor's eyes. The way Dante stood, the way he spoke, the absolute certainty in his tone. These were not the mannerisms of a simple woodworker. Gregor's face went pale. Isolde stepped forward. She didn't yell. She didn't gloat. She simply reached into her purse and pulled out the printed copy of the abandonment contract Gregor had emailed her. She held the paper up, looked Gregor directly in the eye, and tore it cleanly in half. "You have 10 seconds to tell your movers to put down my inventory," she said. Her voice was ice. "Or my next call is to the city housing inspector to report a fraudulent eviction followed by my lawyer for civil damages. And as you can see, we have documented proof." Dante held up his phone. He had been recording video since the moment he broke the wooden beam. The entire exposure was captured in high definition. Gregor swallowed hard. He looked at the lawyers, but they were already backing toward the door. One of them was frantically typing on his phone, presumably calling his firm to report a liability exposure. Gregor raised a hand and gestured sharply to the moving crew. "Put the boxes down," he muttered. "Leave them." The movers set down their crates and filed out quickly. They wanted no part of whatever was happening here. Gregor adjusted his tie with shaking hands. Then he turned and walked out of the gallery without another word. The bell above the door chimed as he left. Isolde stood perfectly still for a long moment. Then her shoulders dropped and she let out a shaky breath. Aurelia, who had been standing near the entrance the entire time, ran forward and wrapped her arms around her sister. "You did it," Aurelia whispered. "You actually did it." But Dante was watching the street through the gallery windows. He saw Gregor climb into a black Mercedes. He saw the man pull out his phone and make a call. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The ride back to the warehouse was quiet, not the tense silence of fear, but the heavy silence of exhaustion mixed with cautious relief. Isolde sat in the passenger seat of Dante's truck staring out at the passing city. Aurelia was in the back already on her phone coordinating with lawyers and insurance agents. Dante drove with one hand on the wheel, his mind racing through contingencies. Gregor Ashwood would report back to the Ravenna Syndicate. They would know that someone had interfered, someone with knowledge of construction and the confidence to directly challenge their operation. It wouldn't take long for them to identify Dante Cross, and once they knew he was involved, the situation would escalate dramatically. "Thank you," Isolde said quietly. Dante glanced at her. "For what?" "For standing there, for not taking over, for letting me face him." "It was your fight," Dante said. "I just provided the tools." Isolde smiled slightly. "You're very good at that, providing exactly what's needed at exactly the right moment." There was something in her tone that made Dante's chest feel tight. He focused on the road ahead. When they arrived back at the warehouse, Dante helped them unload several boxes of critical paperwork and small valuable pieces that Isolde had insisted on removing from the gallery immediately. She didn't trust that Gregor wouldn't try something else. She was right not to trust him. They spent the afternoon organizing the rescued items in the warehouse. Dante built temporary shelving using scrap lumber. Aurelia cataloged everything on her laptop. Isolde moved between the boxes with careful precision, her gallery owner expertise showing through despite the chaos. By 6 o'clock, they had created a makeshift archive in the eastern corner of the warehouse. Dante ordered pizza from the Italian place 3 blocks away. They ate sitting on wooden crates exhausted, but feeling something close to victory. But Dante couldn't shake the tension coiling in his gut. At 8 o'clock, his phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. He opened it. The message contained a single photograph. It showed Aurelia walking out of a coffee shop that morning, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. Below the image was a short message. "Your father sends his regards. Return the Caravaggio or the younger sister dies. You have 48 hours. Dante's blood turned to ice. Isolde was standing across the warehouse laughing at something Aurelia had said. The sound of her laughter was warm and genuine, the first real joy he'd heard from her in days. And now someone was threatening to kill her sister. Dante stood up slowly. He walked to the far end of the warehouse near the windows away from the women. He called Kaz Volkov. "Boss, I just received a threat," Dante said quietly. "Someone is targeting Aurelia Morgana. They're demanding the return of a painting called the Caravaggio. But the painting in the gallery isn't a Caravaggio, it's the Crimson Madonna," Kaz finished. "Your grandmother's painting. Boss, that's what this whole operation has been about. Gregor's eviction was never about real estate. It was about creating chaos so they could recover the painting without suspicion." "Who sent the message?" Dante asked. "The phrasing, 'your father sends his regards,' is specific," Kaz said. "That's Lucien's signature. He always references family when he makes threats. He's trying to get in your head." Dante closed his eyes. He succeeded. "What do you want me to do?" "Put security on Aurelia. Discreet. I don't want her to know she's being followed. And I need you to find out how Lucien knew the painting was in the Morgana Gallery. Someone fed him that information." "On it." Dante ended the call. He stood at the window staring out at the darkening city. Behind him he heard footsteps on the concrete floor. "Dante." He turned to find Isolde standing a few feet away. Her expression was concerned. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Dante looked at her, at the woman who had walked into his warehouse 4 days ago carrying a pink suitcase and a desperate smile. The woman who had no idea that her gallery contained stolen art, that her success had been built on a foundation of lies orchestrated by criminals. The woman who was now in danger because of a painting she never should have possessed. He couldn't tell her the whole truth. Not yet, but he couldn't lie to her anymore either. "No," Dante said quietly. "Everything is not all right." Isolde took a step closer. "Tell me." "There's something about your gallery that you need to know," Dante began. "One of the paintings in your collection, a 15th century Italian piece depicting the Madonna and Child, the Crimson Madonna," Isolde said immediately. "It's one of my most valuable pieces. I acquired it 3 years ago from a private auction in New York. The provenance was immaculate, museum-quality documentation." "The provenance was forged," Dante said. "That painting was stolen from a private collection in Florence 8 years ago during a violent home invasion. 3 people died in that theft." Isolde's face went pale. "That's impossible. I verified everything. The auction house was reputable. The paperwork was manufactured by people who are very good at making stolen art look legitimate," Dante interrupted. "And now they want it back." He showed her the message on his phone. The photograph of Aurelia, the threat. Isolde stared at the screen. Her hands started to shake. "My father," she whispered. "They said, 'Your father sends his regards.' But my father is dead. He died 3 years ago." Dante waited. Isolde looked up at him. Her honey-colored eyes were wide with dawning realization. You know who my father was, don't you? Salvatore Morgana, Dante said quietly. He ran one of the largest art theft and forgery operations on the East Coast for 20 years. The FBI had him under investigation for most of his adult life, but they could never make the charges stick. He died of a heart attack in his estate in Connecticut 3 years ago. Isolde took a step back. She wrapped her arms around herself. I didn't know, she said. Her voice was barely audible. I didn't know until after he died. My mother had kept us away from that part of his life. Aurelia and I thought he was a legitimate art dealer. When he died and I went through his papers, I found evidence. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Contacts with known criminals. Insurance claims for pieces that never existed. Tears started to slide down her cheeks. I tried to distance myself from it. I liquidated everything I could. I started the gallery with clean money from a trust fund my mother had set up. I thought I could build something legitimate, something beautiful, something that wasn't stained by his crimes. You did, Dante said. Your gallery is legitimate, but the people who worked with your father are still out there, and they're using you to launder stolen art without your knowledge. Isolde shook her head. I verify every piece. I check provenance. I work with reputable auction houses. Auction houses that are controlled by the same syndicates, Dante said. They've been using your gallery as a legitimate front for years. You've been building a reputation as a trustworthy dealer while they've been moving stolen pieces through your inventory. The devastation on her face was almost too much to witness. Everything I've built is a lie, she whispered. No, Dante said firmly. He took a step toward her. You built something real. They corrupted it. There's a difference, How do you know all this? Isolde asked. She looked up at him with sudden intensity. How do you know about my father? About stolen art? About syndicate operations? Dante met her gaze. This was the moment, the line he couldn't uncross. Because I run one, he said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Isolde stared at him. The color drained from her face completely. You're a criminal, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. You run a criminal organization. Yes. What kind? Import, export? Weapons mostly. Some narcotics distribution, though I've been working to shut that side down. Real estate holdings, protection services, the standard portfolio. Isolde took another step back. And the woodworking is real, Dante said. It's the only part of my life that's completely mine. The only thing I do that doesn't involve violence or lies or blood money. You lied to me. I told you I ran an import-export business. That wasn't a lie. It was a half-truth, Isolde said. Her voice was rising. You let me believe you were just a craftsman with some gray market side business. You didn't tell me you were a mob boss. Would you have stayed if I had? Dante asked. Isolde opened her mouth, closed it. She had no answer for that. You need protection, Dante continued. Whoever sent that message isn't bluffing. They will hurt Aurelia if you don't give them what they want. And even if you return the painting, they'll still come after you because you know too much now. So what are you suggesting? Isolde asked. Her tone was bitter. That I trust the criminal who's been lying to me since the moment I walked through his door. I'm suggesting you trust the man who fixed your easel when he didn't have to, Dante said. The man who built you a safe place to sleep when you were standing in the rain. The man who is telling you the truth right now, even though it would be easier to keep lying. Isolde looked at him for a long moment. The warehouse was quiet except for the low hum of the heaters and the distant sound of traffic outside. I don't know who you are, she said finally. Yes, you do, Dante replied. You know exactly who I am. You're just deciding whether you can live with it. Before Isolde could respond, Aurelia's voice called out from across the warehouse. Isolde, you need to see this. They both turned. Aurelia was standing at her laptop, her face pale. Dante and Isolde crossed the warehouse quickly. Aurelia turned the laptop screen toward them. She had been researching Dante during the afternoon. The screen showed a news article from 8 years ago. Cross syndicate power struggle leaves 3 dead. Dante Cross emerges as new boss. Below the headline was a photograph of Dante at age 22, being escorted out of a police station. His face was younger, but his eyes were already hard. The caption read, Alleged organized crime figure Dante Cross, charges dropped due to lack of evidence. Aurelia looked between Dante and her sister. He's not just connected, she said quietly. He's the boss. Isolde closed her eyes. Dante waited for the explosion, for the anger, for them to pack their suitcases and walk out into the night, taking their chances with hotels and police protection and legal systems that move too slowly to save them. But instead, Aurelia did something unexpected. She closed the laptop. She looked directly at Dante. "Can you protect my sister?" she asked. The question hung in the air. "Yes," Dante said. "From the people threatening us." "Yes." "Will it require you to hurt people?" Dante didn't hesitate. "Probably." Aurelia nodded slowly. She turned to Isolde. "I know this is insane," she said. "I know we should run. But Isolde, look at what he's already done for us. He gave us shelter when we had nowhere to go. He exposed Gregor's fraud. He's been honest with us when he could have kept lying. And right now, I think he's the only person who can actually keep us alive." "Aurelia," Isolde started. "I'm scared," Aurelia interrupted. "I'm terrified, but I'm also practical. The police won't protect us from organized crime. The legal system won't move fast enough. We need someone who can fight fire with fire, and Dante is offering." Isolde looked at her sister. Then she looked at Dante. "What do you want in exchange?" she asked. "Nothing," Dante said. "People like you don't do things for free." "People like me don't usually care about people like you," Dante replied. "But I'm making an exception." "Why, boy, Dante looked at her, at the woman with honey-colored eyes and a passion for beauty and a determination to build something meaningful out of the ashes of her father's crimes. "Because you deserve better than what you got," he said simply. "And because I'm tired of standing by while good people get crushed by people like me." The admission hung between them, raw and honest and more vulnerable than Dante had allowed himself to be in 8 years. Isolde stared at him. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay," she said, "but I have conditions. No one dies unless there's absolutely no other option. We try to do this legally first. And if we can't, if we have to use your methods, you explain everything to me before you act." "Agreed," Dante said. "And when this is over, you tell me everything. Your whole story, no more half-truths." Dante hesitated, then he nodded. "Agreed." Isolde took a deep breath. "Then we have a deal." That night, Dante made a series of phone calls. He stood at the warehouse windows, watching the city lights blur in the fog, while Kaz Volkov assembled a protection detail for Aurelia. Then he called another number, one he hadn't used in 8 years. The phone rang 4 times before a man answered. "Well, well," the voice said. It was smooth and cultured, with a faint European accent. "Little Dante, I wondered when you'd finally call." "Hello, Uncle Lucien," Dante said quietly. There was a pause, then soft laughter. "You know about the painting. I know you've been using Isolde Morgana as an unwitting fence. I know you orchestrated her father's legitimate business to create the cover. And I know you're threatening to kill her sister if she doesn't return the Crimson Madonna." "It's my painting," Lucien said. "I took it from your grandmother's villa 8 years ago. I have every right to recover my property. You murdered 3 people during that theft. Collateral damage. They were loyal to you. I was removing obstacles." Dante's hand tightened around the phone. "Leave the Morgana sisters alone. This is between us." "Oh, it absolutely is between us," Lucien agreed. "But there's such convenient leverage. Beautiful women, innocent, caught in circumstances beyond their understanding. It's almost poetic. If you touch them..." "You'll what?" Lucien interrupted. "Start a war with the Ravenna Syndicate. They're backing me now, Dante. I have resources you can't match. Soldiers you can't touch. Political connections that make me untouchable. You're still just a boy playing at being a king." "I stopped being a boy the day you tried to kill me," Dante said. "And you're about to learn what kind of king I've become." He ended the call. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Isolde stood a few feet away, wrapped in her gray sweater. She had heard the entire conversation. "That was your uncle," she said quietly. "Yes." "The one who tried to kill you 8 years ago?" "Yes." "And he's the one threatening Aurelia?" "Yes." Isolde walked over to stand beside him at the window. They looked out at the city together. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Dante was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to get your painting back," he said finally. "And then I'm going to make sure Lucien Cross never threatens anyone again." "How?" "By doing what I do best," Dante said. "Building something precise and dismantling something broken." Isolde looked up at him. In the reflection of the window glass, their faces overlapped. The gallery owner and the mob boss. 2 people who shouldn't fit together but somehow did. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Good," Dante said. "Fear keeps you sharp." "I'm afraid of what you might have to become to protect us." Dante turned to look at her directly. "I've already been that person." The question is whether you can stand beside someone who's capable of it. Isolde held his gaze. Then she reached out and placed her hand on his arm, just above his wrist, where his sleeve was rolled up and the scars from old violence were visible. I've spent my whole life running from my father's legacy, she said quietly, building something clean and beautiful to prove I wasn't like him. But maybe I've been wrong. Maybe the answer isn't running. Maybe it's standing my ground and fighting for what I've built. Her fingers tightened on his arm. So I'm choosing to stand, and I'm choosing to trust you. Don't make me regret it. Dante looked down at her hand on his arm, at the connection forming between them despite every logical reason to stay apart. I won't, he said. It was the most honest promise he had made in 8 years. Across the warehouse, Aurelia closed her laptop and pretended she hadn't been watching them. She smiled slightly to herself and pulled the canvas curtain closed around the sleeping area. Outside, fog rolled through the city streets. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new choices between the legal path and the darker road. But tonight, in a warehouse that smelled of sawdust and coffee and possibility, 3 people found an unlikely alliance. The carpenter, the gallery owner, the analyst, and somewhere in Prague, Lucien Cross made his own plans, not knowing that his nephew had already decided to stop playing defense. The game was changing. The king was moving. And when Dante Cross moved, entire empires trembled. Saturday morning came wrapped in golden light. The fog had finally lifted, revealing a San Francisco skyline sharp and clear against a brilliant blue sky. Dante stood at his workbench, running his hand along the smooth surface of the finished walnut dining table. The grain flowed like water under his palm. Perfect joinery, perfect finish, perfect execution. But perfection in woodworking didn't translate to perfection in war. Kaz Volkov arrived at the warehouse at 7 o'clock. He wore a dark suit and carried a slim leather briefcase. His expression was carefully neutral as Dante led him to the kitchen area, away from where Isolde and Aurelia were still sleeping behind the canvas partition. The protection detail is in place, Kaz said quietly. 4 men rotating in 12-hour shifts. Aurelia won't see them, but they'll see anyone who gets within 50 feet of her. Good, Dante said. Kaz opened the briefcase. Inside were documents, photographs, and a small electronic device that looked like a high-end hearing aid. This is everything we have on Lucian's current operation, Kaz said, spreading the papers on the counter. He's been in Prague for the past 6 years building connections with European art thieves. The Ravenna syndicate has been bankrolling him in exchange for access to his distribution network. Dante studied the photographs. Lucien looked older than he remembered. Silver hair instead of dark. Lines around his eyes, but the smile was the same. Cold and calculating. He's planning to move on the painting within 72 hours, Kaz continued. Our intelligence suggests he'll use Gregor Ashwood to create a distraction while his team breaks into the gallery. The painting isn't in the gallery anymore, Dante said. Isolde moved her most valuable pieces here yesterday. Kaz raised an eyebrow. You have a stolen Renaissance painting sitting in your warehouse. I have a woman and her sister under my protection, Dante corrected. The painting is secondary. Boss, with all due respect, this painting is what started the coup 8 years ago. Your grandmother died 6 months after it was stolen. Some say the loss broke her heart. This is personal for you. Dante's jaw tightened, which is why I need to handle it carefully. Emotion makes mistakes. Kaz picked up the small electronic device. This is a directional microphone with encrypted recording, FBI grade. If you can get Lucien to confess to the Florence murders on tape, I have a contact at Interpol who will fast-track an arrest warrant. You have FBI contacts, Dante asked. The Cross Syndicate has been cooperating with federal investigators on Ravenna operations for the past 18 months, Kaz said. You approved it yourself. Immunity deal in exchange for intelligence on their human trafficking network. Dante had forgotten about that. It had been a strategic move to weaken the Ravennas while protecting his own operations. But now it created an opportunity. If I get the confession, will the FBI act fast enough to protect the Morgana sisters? If the evidence is solid, they'll move within hours, Kaz said. But boss, you need to understand what you're risking. If you expose Lucien and he goes down, the Ravennas will know you were behind it. They'll retaliate. This could start a full territorial war. Let it, Dante said quietly. I'm tired of half measures. We end this now or we'll be fighting this same battle in 6 months. Behind them, the canvas curtain rustled. Isolde emerged dressed in jeans and a soft blue sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid. She looked rested but wary. She stopped when she saw Kaz Volkov standing at her kitchen counter. Isolde, this is Kaz, Dante said. My second in command. Kaz, this is Isolde Morgana. Kaz extended his hand. Miss Morgana, I've heard a great deal about you. Isolde shook his hand cautiously. Should I be worried about what you've heard? On the contrary, Kaz said with a slight smile. The boss doesn't usually let people into his personal space. The fact that you're here tells me you're important. Isolde glanced at Dante. He kept his expression carefully neutral. Kaz brought information about the people threatening Aurelia, Dante said. We're planning our next move. Without me? Isolde asked. Her tone was sharp. I was going to brief you once you woke up, Dante replied. I'm awake now. Dante gestured to the papers on the counter. Then let's talk strategy. For the next 2 hours, they built a plan. Aurelia joined them after her shower, and the four of them sat around the kitchen island like a war council. The strategy was simple but dangerous. They would use the Crimson Madonna as bait to draw Lucien out of hiding. Kaz would arrange a private auction at a neutral location, leak the information to Lucien's network, and wait for him to make his move. When Lucien appeared, Dante would confront him, record his confession, and hand everything to the FBI. What if he doesn't confess? Aurelia asked. What if he just takes the painting and disappears? He won't, Dante said. Lucien's ego is too large. He'll want to gloat, to prove he outsmarted me. That's when I'll get him talking. And if something goes wrong, Isolde pressed, if he brings armed men, if there's violence, Dante met her gaze. Then I handle it. By handle it, you mean... I mean I protect you, Dante interrupted, by whatever means necessary. That's the deal we made. Isolde looked like she wanted to argue, but she had agreed to trust him. And trust meant accepting that some solutions existed outside the boundaries of law. Where will this auction happen? She asked instead. The new gallery space, Kaz said. The lease you signed yesterday. It's empty neutral territory, and it has multiple exits. Perfect for a controlled confrontation. Isolde blinked. You want to use my gallery as a trap? I want to use an empty building as a tactical advantage, Kaz corrected. Once this is over, you can fill it with legitimate art and never think about this again. How do we know Lucien will come himself? Aurelia asked. Why wouldn't he send someone else to collect the painting? Because it's personal, Dante said. He stole it from my grandmother to hurt me. He'll want to see my face when he takes it back. Kaz gathered the papers and returned them to his briefcase. I'll set up the auction for tomorrow night. That gives us 24 hours to prepare. I'll have my men secure the perimeter and install surveillance equipment. I want to be there, Isolde said firmly. Absolutely not, Dante replied. It's my painting, my gallery, my life that's been destroyed by this. I'm not sitting in a warehouse while you handle everything. It's too dangerous. So is trusting a man I met 5 days ago to fight my battles for me? Isolde shot back. I'm going. Either you accept that or I'll show up anyway, and you'll have to worry about protecting me while dealing with your uncle. Dante stared at her. The determination in her honey-colored eyes was absolute. Fine, he said finally. But you stay behind me. You don't engage. And if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. Agreed. Kaz looked between them with an expression that might have been amusement. I'll leave you to work out the details. Boss, I'll call you tonight with the final arrangements. He left through the freight elevator, the heavy steel doors closing behind him with a metallic clang. Aurelia stood up from her stool. I'm going to make more coffee. Something tells me we're going to need it. She walked to the espresso machine, leaving Dante and Isolde alone at the counter. You don't have to do this, Dante said quietly. Yes, I do, Isolde replied. I've spent my entire adult life trying to be invisible, trying not to make waves, trying to build something safe and clean and separate from my father's crimes. But safe doesn't exist. Clean is an illusion. And separate is just another word for alone. She looked up at him. I'm tired of being alone, Dante. I'm tired of pretending I can fix everything by myself. So I'm choosing to stand beside someone who knows how to fight, even if that someone is dangerous, even if it scares me. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Dante reached out, not to her shoulder this time, not to ground her or steady her, but to her hand where it rested on the counter. His calloused fingers covered hers gently. You're not alone, he said. Not anymore. Isolde turned her hand over palm up and laced her fingers through his. And for a moment the warehouse was quiet except for the sound of the espresso machine and the distant hum of the city waking up outside. Sunday evening arrived cold and clear. The new gallery space stood empty in the Mission District, its brick walls bare and its concrete floors echoing with every footstep. The massive windows let in the golden light of the setting sun, painting long shadows across the floor. Dante walked through the space checking sight lines and exit routes. Kaz's men had installed small cameras in the corners, invisible unless you knew where to look. The audio recording equipment was hidden in the light fixtures. Isolde stood in the center of the room, turning slowly. She wore dark jeans and a black sweater, practical clothes for whatever the night might bring. Her hair was pulled back in a tight braid. "This is where I was supposed to start over," she said quietly. "A fresh space. Clean history. Just me and my art." "You still can," Dante said, "after tonight." "Will it ever really be clean?" Isolde asked. "Or will I always know that it started with violence and lies?" Dante walked over to stand beside her. "Every building has a history. What matters is what you choose to build on top of it." The Crimson Madonna hung on the far wall, illuminated by a single spotlight. The painting was breathtaking. A young woman in deep red robes held an infant child, both figures rendered in exquisite detail. The brushwork was masterful, each stroke visible and intentional. The gold leaf in the halos seemed to glow in the warm light. Dante had seen this painting in his grandmother's villa when he was a boy. She had told him the story behind it, how it had been in the family for generations, how it represented love and protection and the sacred bond between mother and child. And then Lucian had ripped it from the wall during a violent robbery that left 3 people dead. "It's beautiful," Isolde said, staring at the painting. "I can see why someone would kill for it." "Beauty doesn't justify murder," Dante replied. "No, but it explains obsession." At 7 o'clock, Kaz Volkov arrived with a small team. They positioned themselves throughout the building, invisible but ready. Aurelia had wanted to come, but Dante had convinced her to stay at the warehouse with 2 guards. If something went wrong tonight, he needed to know she was safe. At 7:30, a black Mercedes pulled up outside the gallery. Gregor Ashwood stepped out, followed by 2 large men in expensive suits. Gregor looked nervous, his eyes darting around the street. "He's early," Kaz said quietly into his radio. "The primary target hasn't arrived yet." Dante watched from behind the tinted windows. "Gregor's the advanced scout. Lucien will be close." Sure enough, 5 minutes later, a silver Bentley pulled up behind the Mercedes. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. Lucien Cross emerged like royalty, stepping onto a stage. He was 55 years old but looked younger. Silver hair styled perfectly. A tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He wore a thin smile as he surveyed the building. Dante felt his jaw tighten. 8 years. 8 years since this man had tried to kill him. Since he had stolen the painting and disappeared into Europe with a third of the family's resources. And now he was here walking into Dante's trap with absolute confidence. "Positions," Dante said quietly into his own radio. He walked to the gallery entrance and opened the door. Lucian's smile widened when he saw him. "Nephew," he said warmly, as if they were meeting for a pleasant dinner. "You've grown up. You look more like your father every day." "Don't," Dante said flatly. "Don't what acknowledge our blood relation. But we are family, Dante. That never changes, no matter how much bad business comes between us." Lucian walked into the gallery, his eyes immediately finding the Crimson Madonna on the wall. His expression shifted to something almost reverent. "There she is," he murmured, "just as beautiful as I remember." "You mean just as beautiful as when you murdered 3 people to steal her," Dante said. Lucian turned back to him, the smile never wavering. "They were in the way. Surely you understand. You've had to make difficult decisions in your years as boss." "I've never murdered innocent people." "Everyone is guilty of something," Lucian replied. "Those guards knew whose vault they were protecting. They chose their side." Behind Lucian, Gregor and his 2 men filed into the gallery. They spread out, trying to look casual but clearly tense. "Where's the Morgana woman?" Lucian asked. "I expected to see her here begging for her sister's life." "She's under my protection," Dante said. "How noble. The mob boss playing knight in shining armor. Does she know what you really are, Dante? Does she know about the bodies buried under your empire?" "She knows enough," Lucian laughed. "Honesty. How refreshing. I always lied to my lovers. Easier that way, less complicated when you have to dispose of them." The casual admission of murder made Dante's blood run cold, but he kept his expression neutral. The recording equipment was running. Every word was being captured. "Why did you really steal the painting?" Dante asked. "It wasn't just about the money." "No," Lucian agreed. "It was about legacy. Your grandmother never respected me. She saw me as the weak brother, the one who couldn't lead. When your father died and you took control instead of me, she endorsed the decision. An untested boy over her own son. So I took what she loved most." and 3 people died. Collateral damage in a family war, Lucian said dismissively. You would have done the same in my position. No, Dante said quietly. I wouldn't have. Liar, you've killed to protect your position. Don't pretend to be better than me. I've killed in self-defense, in defense of others. Never for revenge, never for spite, and never innocent people whose only crime was showing up to work. Lucian's smile faded slightly. You're soft, Dante, just like your father. It's why you'll eventually lose. Real power requires the willingness to do anything. Sacrifice anyone. You still have lines you won't cross. That makes you weak. From the shadows near the back of the gallery, Isolde stepped forward. Lucian's eyes shifted to her immediately. His smile returned predatory and cold. Miss Morgana, how lovely to finally meet you. I've admired your gallery from afar. Such exquisite taste in art, though I suppose you inherited that from your father. Don't speak about my father, Isolde said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched into fists. Why not? Salvatore and I did business together for years. He was a craftsman in his own way, creating perfect forgeries, building impeccable false provenance. A true artist. He was a criminal. As are we all in our own ways, Lucian said. The only difference is some of us have the courage to admit it. He turned back to Dante. Now shall we complete our transaction? I take the painting. You release your claim to it. And the Morgana sisters live peaceful lives, never knowing how close they came to tragedy. Or, Dante asked, or I take the painting anyway and Aurelia Morgana has an unfortunate accident. Perhaps a car crash, perhaps a home invasion gone wrong. These things happen in cities like San Francisco. The threat was clear and unmistakable. Dante reached into his jacket pocket. Gregor's men tensed hands, moving toward their concealed weapons. But Dante pulled out his phone. He held it up, screen facing Lucien. This entire conversation has been recorded, Dante said. Every threat, every admission of murder, every detail about the Florence robbery. I have video and audio of you confessing to crimes that carry life sentences in 3 countries. Lucien's expression went perfectly still. The smile disappeared. You're bluffing. I'm not, Dante said. And copies of this recording are already en route to Interpol, the FBI, and the Italian National Police. You have about 20 minutes before multiple arrest warrants are issued. For the first time, Lucien looked uncertain. His eyes darted to the corners of the room, searching for cameras. Then his face hardened into something ugly. Gregor, take the painting, he ordered. Kill anyone who interferes. Gregor moved toward the wall where the Crimson Madonna hung. But before he could reach it, Isolde stepped directly into his path. She held the mahogany easel Dante had repaired, gripping it like a weapon. You're not taking anything, she said. Gregor laughed. You think you can stop me with a piece of furniture? I think you're a coward who hides behind lawyers and fake structural claims, Isolde replied. And I'm done being afraid of cowards. She swung the easel hard. The solid mahogany edge caught Gregor across the forearm as he reached for the painting. He yelped and staggered back. One of his men moved forward. Before he could reach Isolde, Dante was there. He caught the man's wrist in a grip like iron twisted sharply and sent him stumbling into the wall. The second man pulled a gun. Kaz Volkov emerged from the shadows, his own weapon already drawn and aimed. FBI, drop the weapon. The man froze, his eyes wide. He looked at Lucien, who had gone pale. Drop it, Kaz repeated. The gun clattered to the floor. Outside, the sound of sirens filled the street. Red and blue lights flashed through the gallery windows. Lucien spun toward the back exit. But 2 federal agents were already there, blocking his escape. They wore tactical vests marked with FBI in bold yellow letters. Lucien Cross, you are under arrest for murder, art theft, and international racketeering, one of them announced. You have the right to remain silent. Lucien's face twisted with rage. He looked at Dante with pure hatred. You betrayed your own family. No, Dante said quietly. I stopped letting you destroy what family actually means. The agents moved forward, securing Lucien's hands behind his back with zip ties. They did the same to Gregor and his 2 men. As they were being led out, Lucien turned back one last time. This isn't over, he snarled. The Ravennas will retaliate. You've started a war you can't win. Then I'll finish it, Dante replied. The agents escorted the prisoners out to waiting vehicles. Through the windows, Dante watched Lucien being placed in the back of an unmarked sedan. 8 years of searching. 8 years of knowing his uncle had murdered innocent people and walked free. And now finally justice. Kaz holstered his weapon and walked over to Dante. The FBI is taking lead on the prosecution. With your recorded confession and the evidence we provided on the Florence murders, he's looking at life without parole. What about the Ravennas? Dante asked. The arrest will destabilize their European operations. They'll be too busy covering their own exposure to retaliate immediately. We'll have time to prepare. Isolde stood near the wall, still holding the mahogany easel. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Dante walked over to her. Gently, he took the easel from her hands and set it against the wall. You hit him, he said. I did, Isolde replied. She sounded slightly stunned. I actually hit him. You protected what's yours. I was terrified. You didn't show it. Isolde looked up at him. Her honey-colored eyes were bright with unshed tears. Not from fear, from release, from the overwhelming relief of survival. Is it really over? She whispered. This part is, Dante said, and the painting will be returned to the Italian government as stolen property. They'll likely place it in a museum, where it belongs. I'll lose it. You never really had it, Dante said gently. But you have your gallery, your inventory, your freedom. That's what matters. Isolde nodded slowly. Then without warning, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Dante went very still. Then carefully he placed his hands on her back and held her while she shook with silent tears against his chest. Kaz quietly gestured to his men. They filed out of the gallery, leaving the two of them alone in the empty space. 1 year later, the fog rolled through San Francisco on a typical gray morning. But inside the Morgana Gallery, the light was warm and golden. The space had been transformed. The bare brick walls now displayed carefully curated artwork. Modern pieces mixed with classical sculptures. Paintings by emerging artists shared wall space with established masters. Everything was legitimate, documented, and beautiful. In the back half of the gallery, separated by a wall of frosted glass, Dante's workshop occupied the loading dock area. The sound of machinery was muted, but present a low, rhythmic hum that blended with the classical music playing through the gallery speakers. Tonight was different. The gallery was filled with people, collectors in expensive clothes, artists in creative outfits, critics taking notes, journalists photographing the installations. It was the opening night of a major exhibition, and the energy in the room hummed with anticipation. Isolde moved through the crowd with grace and confidence, answering questions and introducing artists. She wore a midnight blue dress that caught the light when she moved. Her hair was swept up in an elegant twist. She was radiant. Dante remained in the background, watching from near the workshop entrance. He wore a dark suit for the occasion, uncomfortable, but willing to make the effort for her. Over the past year, he had stepped back from day-to-day syndicate operations, almost entirely leaving Kaz to manage the legitimate restructuring. The transition had been smoother than expected. The Ravennas, weakened by Lucien's arrest and the exposure of their European network, had quietly withdrawn from contested territories. Dante had found that he didn't miss the power. He had the workshop. He had the gallery partnership. He had something he'd never expected to have: peace. Aurelia appeared beside him, holding 2 glasses of wine. She handed him one. She had taken on a formal role as the gallery's business manager, and her sharp analytical mind had transformed the operation's financial efficiency. You clean up well, she said. I look like I'm wearing someone else's skin, Dante replied. True, but Isolde appreciates the effort. They watched Isolde guide a wealthy couple toward one of Dante's display pedestals. The piece was made from reclaimed oak with joinery so precise it looked like a single piece of carved wood. She talks about your work like it's fine art, Aurelia observed. It's just furniture. No, it's craftsmanship. There's a difference, and people recognize quality when they see it. Dante took a sip of wine. It was expensive and tasted like oak and summer fruit. Nothing like the cheap beer he used to drink in the old days. Across the gallery, Isolde looked up. Her eyes found his immediately, as if she could sense his gaze. She smiled. A private smile meant just for him. He smiled back. Over the past year, they had built something together. Not just the gallery, but a life. It had happened gradually, naturally, like wood grain, following its inherent pattern. There had been no dramatic declarations, no single moment of commitment, just a series of choices made daily to stay and build, rather than leave and protect. You gave up everything for this, Aurelia said quietly. Power, control, and empire. Was it worth it? Dante thought about the question. About 8 years of violence and isolation. About the weight of running an organization built on fear. About the hollowness of wealth gained through suffering. Then he thought about mornings making coffee while Isolde emerged from sleep. About the sound of her footsteps crossing the gallery floor. About working at his bench while her voice drifted through the frosted glass. about building something beautiful together instead of destroying things alone. Yes, he said simply, it was worth everything. That night, after the last guest left and the gallery was quiet, Dante and Isolde walked through the empty space together. Isolde was barefoot, her heels abandoned near the entrance. Dante had ditched the suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. They stopped in front of a large canvas near the back wall. It was an abstract piece in shades of red and gold titled Redemption. The artist told me it's about transformation, Isolde said, about how something broken can become something beautiful if you're willing to do the work. I like it, Dante said. Me too. They stood in comfortable silence looking at the painting. Kaz called me this afternoon, Dante said finally. The Ravenna Syndicate has officially withdrawn from our territory. Lucien's arrest destabilized their European operations so badly that they're restructuring completely. They won't bother us anymore. That's good news, Isolde said. It means it's really over. The war that's been building for 8 years. It ended without the bloodshed I expected. Because you chose a different path. We chose a different path, Dante corrected. Isolde leaned her head against his shoulder. In the years since that night in the empty gallery, they had learned each other's rhythms. They had navigated the complicated territory of building a relationship between two people from fundamentally different worlds. There had been challenges moments when Dante's past threatened to intrude, when Isolde struggled with the knowledge of what he had been capable of, when trust felt fragile. But they had worked through it, because what they were building mattered more than what they had come from. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't shown up that morning? Isolde asked. If we'd gone to a hotel instead? Every day, Dante admitted, and every day I'm grateful you didn't. Me too. Outside fog rolled through the Mission District, wrapping the city in soft gray silence. But inside the gallery, warmth and light pushed back the darkness. Dante thought about the pull saw cutting through oak, about the precision of dovetail joints, about the honesty of wood grain. He had learned that true victory wasn't about dominance or power or fear. It was about sleeping with a clear conscience, building something meaningful, choosing love over empire. He had learned that real strength was knowing when to fight and when to lay down your weapons and build instead. And he had learned that the greatest transformation wasn't changing who you were. It was accepting who you'd been while becoming who you wanted to be. The carpenter and the gallery owner. The reformed king and the artist's daughter. Two people from broken worlds who had found each other and decided to create something whole. Come on, Isolde said, pulling him toward the workshop. I want to see what you're working on next. Dante followed her through the frosted glass door into his space. The smell of sawdust welcomed him home. The pull saw waited on the workbench. The wood grain ran true and clear. Dante picked up his tools and turned to the new project, waiting for him a commission for a museum display case, something that would hold precious artifacts with the respect they deserved. Isolde perched on a stool near the bench, content to watch him work. This had become their ritual. After gallery events, after difficult days, after the noise of the world outside, they would come here, to the quiet, to the work, to the simple truth of wood in hands and creation. What are you thinking about? She asked after a while. Dante set down the saw and looked at her, at the woman who had stumbled into his life carrying a pink suitcase in desperation, at the partner who had chosen to stand beside him when running would have been easier, at the person who saw all of him, the violence and the gentleness, the darkness and the light, and chose to stay anyway. I'm thinking, he said quietly, that I finally understand what my grandmother meant. About the painting, about what it represented, love and protection, and the sacred bond between people who choose each other. He walked over to where she sat. She used to say that the most valuable things can't be stolen. They can only be given. Isolde reached out and took his hand, her fingers elegant and soft laced through his calloused, scarred ones. Then I give you this, she said. All of it, the messy parts and the beautiful parts, the fear and the trust, the past and the future. I give you my choice every day to build this with you. Dante pulled her close. And I give you mine, every day, for as long as you'll have me. They stayed like that for a long moment, two people who had found home in each other. Then Dante returned to his workbench. Isolde remained on her stool, occasionally commenting, sometimes just present in the comfortable silence. And in a workshop behind a gallery, in a city wrapped in fog, a carpenter and a king continued the work of becoming something neither had thought possible whole. Because in the end, that was all anyone could do. Build something, fix what was broken, create beauty where there had been darkness, and trust that the grain would hold.